Hello and welcome to Wizards, Warriors and Words, a fantasy writing advice podcast. I'm Jed Herne, author of Across the Broken Stars.
I'm Dyrk Ashton, film professor and author of the Paternus Trilogy.
I'm Michael R. Fletcher, author of Smoke and Stone and some other stuff and things.
I'm Rob J. Hayes, author of the War Eternal series and Never Die. We'll go with that one.
And today we are joined by a very special guest, our first guest for the podcast, RJ Barker. RJ, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, I'm RJ Barker. I'm the author of the Wounded Kingdom trilogy, which are Age of Assassins, Blood of Assassins, and King of Assassins. And my latest book is The Bone Ships, which is about ships made of bone. There's a clue in the title.
And today's episode is, first of all, thank you so much for coming on. This is pretty exciting for us. See how we go. Yeah, we'll see how we go coordinating 5 people in this Zoom chat that we're recording in, but fingers crossed.
It's all your job, so if it goes wrong, it's your fault.
All right, I will edit that out so that it looks like you're talking to Michael instead of me. And without further ado, which I can't really do in audio, but yeah, something to try. Today's episode is all about tense and point of view. So essentially the kind of perspective that we're telling our stories from and the sort of, chronology that we are describing things in. So I think it could be really useful to start off with a quick definition of some of these things. RJ, would you like to just define the different tenses and point of views that are available to authors?
On the spot.
You do know I didn't go to school, don't you? There's first person, which is from the point of view of the character. Second person, which is complicated. And third person, where you're following the character around, like they went over there, and first person is I, and second person just confuses me every time I've ever looked at it.
It's like grandmother's second cousin's former roommate telling a story.
It's like there's somebody in the character's head, but not the character, isn't it? Sort of thing. So they're sort of like saying, "You did this, you did that."
Yeah, and it sends me a bit potty when I try and read it, because I just sit there thinking, but I didn't.
When the author's like, "Oh, you walk down the corridor," and you're like, "Nope, that didn't do it."
No, I don't walk anywhere. I'm very lazy.
Or do you find yourself accidentally doing the things that it's describing that you're doing? It's sort of like, you turned left and you're like, "Oh yeah, I did actually."
I am quite suggestible sometimes. If I was tired and I was reading a murder mystery, that could be really bad. My personal favourite is always first person. That is what I love. That is my great joy to read. Is
first person is when it's like, I did this, I went there, she walked into my office.
Yeah,
that
sort of classic hard-boiled fiction and stuff.
Why do you like that
really
particular
in a character's
point of
head?
view?
I think because one of the great joys for me in a book is when you have that sort of dislocation. You're reading it, and because you're hearing someone's mental narrative, and we all have a mental narrative. I have one that's definitely quite odd, and there's that sort of, you can't quite click with it because it's not your mental narrative, and they've got the character then, because you're not just reading it as you're having to, and then suddenly it's like bang, and you're somebody else, and you're just experiencing someone else's life, and I love that. I love that, and I don't think I experience any other form of storytelling in quite the same way. The further back you get from a character, for me, the less involved I am with the story. Like it's like Brandon Sanderson who write in The Third, and it's quite removed, and the text is it's like it's not a barrier between you and what's going on. It's purely storytelling. That doesn't really work for me at all. Where I like very inflected narrative that forces you to experience that with the character. That sounded quite clever. I'm quite pleased with that.
That was good. Yeah, no, that's should just end the episode there on that high note, but we're going to continue beating this dead horse. So, Rob, you have used both. Maybe that's what the subtitle for our show should be: Wizards, Warriors, and Words, beating a dead horse. Rob, you have used both first person and third person styles in your writing. How do you decide which one is appropriate for the kind of story you're telling? And what have you found as like sort of the differences in your experience with those different styles?
I must admit, I can't. It's not a sort of conscious decision that I make where I'm like, I'm going to write this one in first or third. I mean, I've written two stories in first person now. One was my little sci-fi book, which nobody's ever heard of, and the other one is the War Eternal series. And I think I just wrote that in first person because I wrote the prologue, the first chapter, and it was just from the point of view of this young woman who's seeing the end of the war, and it just felt right, I guess. Being a organic writer, it's like, it just felt the right thing to do, and then took it on from there. Whereas most of the time I do write in third person because it's easier.
You certainly do have less of the you have less of the, I suppose, repetitiveness of saying I all the time, I find in third person. For me personally, that can be one thing where if I am reading a first person thing, it can be repetitive to just be like, I. But good writers, of course, can, get around that with different sentence construction. Dyrk, will you...
How do they do that?
Me did this.
They just be good. Correct. Mike wins. Dyrk, you were about to say something?
No, I just basically...
Oh, okay.
Shut up then, fuck.
I think the thing about first person is it allows you to really get inside of the character's head, and they can use, or you can use their thoughts on what's going on around them and the other characters to really influence the reader, which I find fun.
You can lie to your reader, which is a great thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
You can do the old unreliable narrator bit, which is always a lot of fun.
I always find when I'm writing the bone ships, which is in third person, I found that if I was writing and I got tired, it'd just slip into first person, because that's how I want to write all the time, because I find it much easier. And I'm really lazy.
I don't know. You have a pretty impressive output.
Yeah, I don't think I do. I think I write a lot less than a lot of people. I'm just lucky that what I write, touch wood, tends to be quite close to what gets published in the end.
Yeah.
There are no big edits. I think that's what makes me reasonably quick. But that's one day that's going to trip me up. Because my editor's going to come back and go, this is terrible, rewrite it all. I'm just going, I don't know.
So, Mike, what about you? What's your kind of stance on first versus third person narration?
Okay, so I like to write in a really tight third, still right in the character's head, but definitely third. First person I actually find difficult. I have to really put effort into it. I read Brian Staveley's Skullsworn, and it's in first, and it was so fucking good that I was like, I gotta do it. So I wrote a book in first. It was really hard. It was really freaking difficult. Brian is a liar. He was like, oh, it's easy. Just go and do it. I found for me, the big difficulty was I kept sliding into this sort of like semi-passive voice and sort of had a tendency to to tell instead of show because there's that first person narrative telling the story. It just sort of became really easy to let him tell the fucking story. But it's like, created a separation for me between the story and the reader. So catching that and fixing it, that took a lot of effort.
So that's interesting. You're saying that when it was in first person, you actually found that it kind of separated you from the story more than third person.
Yeah, I mean, but that was because I was writing it badly.
I see.
That wasn't a flaw in the tense. That was a flaw in the writer.
And I think that's what is really important with this, is like, it is about finding something that is good for your natural style. And, you know, everything has its sort of pros and cons. RJ?
I chose to write the bone ships in. It's very close third person, like Mike said. But I chose third person because it it was harder for me, and I wanted to push myself a bit more. And I regret that now because it's been really hard. but yeah, and I think it's all to do with your own influence, isn't it? Because I think my influences there's a lot of crime writing in my influence, and the first person is very much the way of doing a lot of that. So that's why it seems easy. But the Assassin books, I literally flew through because that voice was so natural to me. It was just in my head. Like I wrote the first one in 6 weeks. It was really just like I can do this. Where the Battleships, I kind of have to think about whole sentences. It's awful. I do it.
Whole sentences.
Yeah.
It's one of the best things about first person. You get to use sentence fragments, which is wonderful. I love using them.
Yeah.
I use them anyway.
Yeah.
Or
Like
as
when
I
I'm
found
not
out-
supposed to use those. Like,
Or if when I was doing a reading from the Battleships, I use very long sentences that humans can't actually do. Just like reading it out, oh, I'm going blue. Oh.
Your poor audiobook narrator must just be dying from that.
I don't know how he did it. Bless him, Jude.
Yeah.
It must be. He must just punctuate himself because it's kind of. I used a lot of 17th century writing, and they just didn't care about punctuation. Just, whatever.
Just put it all down there. Yeah.
They're still making it up at that time, weren't they? It was just like, yeah, we'll put this rule in, and then it can be an actual rule. Put it in the dictionary or something.
Yeah, but most of our grammar rules are Victorian, aren't they? They invented it so they could make people look stupid who hadn't been to the right schools.
It works.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
and
Dyrk,
grammar is just guidelines anyway.
yeah, as long as the reader kind of like gets what's going on, I think that's the main
Yeah.
thing. And like a particular writer's like, I would say Joe Abercrombie, the way sometimes he constructs things is not grammatically correct, but like it works really well for the characters that he's in. So Dyrk,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on first versus
And,
third narration?
Yeah, and mine transitions right into tense because
Perfect.
that went right onto it. I mean, for me, I think, and for everybody, the important thing is to find the point of view that works best for the story, for the kind of story you're telling, right? And you know, like certain stories, like Age of Assassins, and and a lot of urban fantasy come out of the Raymond Chandler noir crime thriller kind of thing. And RJ already mentioned that, and those are written in first person. But for the Paternus trilogy, the vast majority of fantasy books that we read are in, especially epic fantasy, are in tight third. I mean, probably, what would you guys say, 95% of the books are probably written in a very tight third. And the very tight third is really relatively new in the last 20, 30 years to become the mainstream perspective and point of view. And I started feeling hemmed in by that because you really can't get far out. It's as close as you can get to first person while staying third person as you can get, right? So I decided I wanted to use more of a third person omniscient, which used to be more common, where you can move from what one character is experiencing to the next character, to the next character, and in a broader sense. And you can even put paragraphs or statements in there that are said by the narrator, right? Which you can't really do. You can't do with first person. You can't really do with a tight third. So omniscient means it's kind of a God's point of view. So
I think you've got to be careful with it, though. I mean, you do really well in Paternus, but I've read books that are done in sort of this omniscient viewpoint before that they're just confusing. The head hopping gets so confusing, and you're no longer sure who's thinking and doing and saying what.
Yep.
So it is. I think it's one that's pretty hard to get right, to be honest.
It's very difficult. It's not quite as hard as second person, but that's why second person is so very rarely used.
Mm.
Very, very rarely used. And I can't even really explain it very well. It's like it's told by the sidekick about the main character. And Jemison does it.
Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes, yeah.
Yeah.
The Sherlock.
Very recently, Tamsin Muir in Harrow the Ninth. That's told mostly in second person as well.
Yeah.
Is it really? Is Gideon the Ninth also?
No, Gideon the Ninth is. Oh, I'm trying to remember. I think Gideon's in first person.
So they shift. So she shifts from one book to the next. Tamsin.
Yep.
Oh wow.
Confusing as hell, but really good.
I will also say
that's also very rare to shift the type of perspective in a series, but that's pretty cool.
The other
I need
place,
to read more of that.
yeah, the other place where you see the second person crop up a bit more is also in like particular choose your own adventure stories. Like at the moment, I'm writing for an interactive fiction company, and like they want it in kind of the you are doing this, you are doing that. What will you do next? Because it is supposed to be, you know, the person who is experiencing the story saying what it's about. But we should get to our featured book for this episode, which is by our very special guest, RJ Barker. RJ, do you want to tell us about the Bone Ships?
Yeah, it's I'm not going to say naval. It's a fantasy set in a world that's mostly water, and they build the ships out of the bones of dragons. So of course, these dragons are absolutely massive, and it's a matriarchy. Not a very nice matriarchy, because that in fact it's awful. They sacrifice the firstborn children, and they're just deeply unpleasant. And it's the story of Joran Twiner, who is the shipwife or captain of one of these ships, and he's terrible, and he's a bit of a xenophobic sad sack trying to drink himself to death when we meet him. And he meets this woman called Lucky Mayus, who is the best shipwife in their army, and for some reason she has been condemned to this ship of the condemned that he is on, but he doesn't know why, and she just takes his command from him, and they go on an adventure. And it's in a pretty unique world. I'm always a bit worried about saying that, but it is its own thing, and I'm so grateful that Orbit let me do it, because it's properly loopy. but I love it. It's a Master and Commander versus Godzilla is how I sold it.
Oh, nice.
And that's
Awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Is that under a minute? Yeah. But there is the Bone Ships. And the next one, Call of the Bone Ships, is out in November. And they're all written. So they're definitely coming.
What was the name of the next one, sorry?
Call of the Bone Ships.
Oh, Call of the Bone Ships. Excellent. So that's out right now. I will link to that in the show notes, as always. So we have about 5 minutes or so before we do have to wrap up this recording.
Robin Hobb said it was brilliant.
Oh, there we go.
So,
Just sliding.
so I'm never writing anything ever again.
You're done. You've reached the pinnacle.
Yeah.
You're there.
That is a pretty cool cover blurb to have. So nice work.
Sweet.
So yeah.
Let me help transition to tense, because we don't have that much time left. RJ, one thing I found fascinating, and one of the reasons we wanted to do this with you on the episode was in Age of Assassins, you write that in past tense, but when you go into a fight scene or an action sequence, you shift to present tense, and I found that fascinating.
Yeah, my copy editors wouldn't agree with you. But,
no,
they hated it. But
they hate that kind of thing, and I just wanted to hear more of why you wanted to do that and how you fought to keep it.
I think at some point in my head, I've read something in present tense that has made me associate it with an altered state of mind, which is why I tend to bounce off books written in third person present tense. I think I find it. I love Tudor history, and I can't read Wolf Hall. I just find it impenetrable. I can't get into it. So Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I could read that, but I think that book is written like a long dream sequence. It's an odd thing. But I wanted to create for the reader a feeling that something changed during those action sequences. And if you've not read the books, it's a bit spoilery. But basically, it's to do with magic. Whenever Girton is somehow attached to or using magic, it goes into present tense. And a lot of readers won't won't realize that because it's a sort of technically right thing, really. Is they will just have this feeling of something changed, and it might be very subtle. And some people will hate it, and they tell me. But it was done specifically for that reason. That I wanted to create a change of how the reader was reading at that point, and then come out of it again. And I do it in the bone ships as well. There's a point in the bone ships. Sorry.
You do. That's all.
Yeah, right. This is very spoilery. There's a big battle at a point in the bone ships where they're just sort of completely taken out. And I just wanted this sort of feeling of them being stunned. So it changes into present tense for that sort of sequence of the aftermath. And it's really deliberate. And I really like it. And that's, I think you can use tense to affect the reader in that way. And it's just sort of quite an interesting thing to do.
I think the way you did it in the Wounded Kingdom trilogy, at least, which I haven't read, it really increases the urgency I felt of the sort of like of the narrative. And it really helped to sort of suck you in and start moving things along at a much faster pace whenever it went into sort of Gerton's sort of like present tense of that.
Present tense is awesome for action scenes. I wrote my very first book in present tense, and then the editors made me rewrite it in past tense. And the action scenes lost a good chunk of their urgency when it moved to past tense. It was I didn't have the gall to keep the combat scenes in present tense, so I just did as I was told.
I think that's one of the great advantages in the fact that I never went to school, and I've never done any form of read any books about writing or been on any courses, that I'm completely ignorant of what is and isn't correct. So I'll just kind of go, that's a good idea. I'll do that.
Well, proper.
Worked for William Blake, so nice work.
Yeah, so, and just because I'm a professional writer, people presume that I'm doing it because I know what I'm doing. And I'm not doing it because I like the sound of it. That's all it is.
It looks like we're
going to learn pretty quickly from these series of podcasts that none of us know what we're doing.
Nobody knows what they're doing. I think that's the big thing. It takes you about 30 years to realise that. And then suddenly you think, wait, everybody's a complete chancer. Except for my editor. I just add that one.
Just in case they're listening. So we do have to wrap this one up, but this is a really good segue because next week's episode will also have RJ Barker on, and we will be talking about fight scenes. So on that note, we will be signing off with this episode. Thank you everyone for listening or watching. If you had any comments for this, you can either leave them below if you're watching on YouTube, or you can tweet us if you're listening to the podcast. We will include everyone's Twitter handles in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Wizards, Warriors, and Words. We hope you learned something useful. Let us know what you thought about this episode in the comments below. We'll do our best to respond. We'd also love to hear your questions. Comment with your questions below, and we might even answer it on the show. If you haven't already, please subscribe and like this video. This helps more people discover the show. Wizards, Warriors, and Words is jointly hosted by Dyrk Ashton, Michael R. Fletcher, Rob J. Hayes, and Jed Herne, with editing by Jed Herne. Our music comes from Michael R. Fletcher, and our artwork is by Felix Ortiz. Thank you again for watching. Now go and write extraordinary stories. We'll see you next time.